10th, 2021. Work session items. We have 3: presentation by City of Manistee Housing Commission on RAD conversion of scattered site issues, the update on the American Rescue Plan, and the Riverwalk maintenance. We will open with public comments on work-related items. Is there any public comment? Hearing none, I will welcome Clinton McGivern Copus. Sorry.
For those who haven't met Jonathan Nesberg is with Commonwealth Development, our co-worker in this development project. Thank you for giving us some time tonight. Give you a real brief update of where things are at with Century Terrace and Harborview. We've had some delays in paperwork, mainly HUD paperwork, and then wanting things processed differently. So our goal of September 1 has been moved back until October 1 or November 1 at the very latest. It all depends on how swiftly the RAD conversion team for HUD can stamp all the paperwork and give its final approval and not ask for more paperwork. But things are moving ahead. We've got the relocation plan going for the residents where they're going to stay in their buildings and move from one unit to another, all taken care of. Relocation team will pack them up if they want them to, and unpack them, and move them, and then move them back over, no cost to them. So hopefully things are going well. We try to have good meetings with the residents and keep them updated and aware of what's happening with the project. But hopefully soon, I can't wait to see that get all started there. But tonight, we're here to talk to you about a new and exciting project for us that we're calling the Lake Winds apartment homes. And it's the phase 2 of our RAD conversion. As you know, we had 218 units of public housing. 167 of those units are at Harborview and Century Terrace. Remaining are our scattered sites, mainly at Vine Street and 12th Street and down around the corner there. And then a couple spreads throughout. Lindsay brought up and passed to you a Google map that showed where our sites are. Everywhere there's one of those little blue pointies gives you the idea of where the sites are. Our goal, though, is twofold: to create a brand new place, for not just these residents, but for a broad spectrum of income, from the very low income that we have up to 80%, right, Jonathan, of AMI in the community. And we want to create a place where the City of Manistee's income levels are representative there. Not just the very poor and not just those more well off, but what some folks may call, working folks, or the affordable housing workforce kind of thing. But we want to have a place there where we're working on partnering with Work First, and we already have an existing partnership with Central Wellness, and we want to expand that and try to help people out that living there. But one of the cool things about our scattered sites that you may not know is that a majority of the one-bedroom units are occupied by retired folks. And we want to give a nice place for our retired folks that are living in a home instead of in a large apartment complex like Century Terrace or Harborview. And they'll be moving over, with that. The brochure kind of gives, it does give a good layout of an idea of how we might lay out the place on the property there on the corner of Washington and Veterans, and a timeline of our goals of construction and the mix of units. We want to have hopefully 16 one-bedrooms, 32 bedrooms, 14 3 and 14 4 bedrooms. which will leave us about 16 units that are readily then available for anyone in that income from the very low up to 80% of AMI in the community. So we're creating 16 new affordable housing units in our community here. And there'll be a mix of the bedrooms. It's not saying that only 2 bedrooms or 1 bedrooms will be available to the general community. It's going to be a mix of those units. One of the goals we're trying to reach is everyone is working on breaching that gap of 582 units needed in our county. And this is going to help in that direction. And our long-range goal is to continue doing what we can to help breach that 582 that are vacant or that are needed within our community. Is there anything that you'd like to add that I didn't cover yet?
Yeah, if you're all done, I'll add a little more detail as Clint said, and many of you are aware who were with us at the start of Century Terrace Harborview. I'm with Commonwealth Development, and we are kind of the developer partner working with the Housing Commission to provide the development expertise and put the whole project together, kind of from start to completion. So, yeah, as Clint kind of gave a good overview, but there's going to be, we have the preliminary site layout here. We have actually already submitted a PUD application, and we're working along that process as well with the city to have that approved alongside with this. Our intent is to apply for funding for this project on October 1, and our request is for this project to receive a 4% pilot and a municipal services agreement as well. So as Clinton mentioned, this is the conversion of the existing Housing Commission units, and those existing units are under a pilot that's even less than what we'll be requesting. And once that conversion is complete, those units will go back on ad valorem tax rolls. Yeah, we feel that this location and this is really well suited for this. There's, it's a kind of between a single family area and the more industrial area on the corner there. And it's, there's some nice lands, some nice wooded areas, and it's going to be a nice kind of layout as far as.
Where exactly is the location? I can't tell from the map.
Yeah, sorry about
Right
that.
across the street
so
from the
south,
city garage.
Yeah, so southeast corner of Veterans Oak and Washington Street.
Southeast
So it's-
corner. Okay.
Yeah, so right across from the DPW there. Yeah.
And how does this impact the scattered sites? What's the connection between the scattered sites and this project? Are the scattered sites going to disappear?
Yes.
Yep.
After we've moved everyone over, the scattered sites, we will sell those properties. We don't know exactly how we're going to define it. We don't have interest from habitat.
I wasn't here for the beginning of this, so I didn't know the connection between the two pieces, so thank you.
Yeah, yep, and the conversion, so public housing has historically been underfunded and hasn't, there aren't the funds there to keep the properties in good shape. Converting it to this, which is then the LIHTC program, the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, there's private financing comes in, so there'll be a private mortgage on the property. And then there's also, for the long term, the LIHTC financing, it provides you can refinance after 15 years and bring in more funding to kind of keep the properties up. So it's really a much better program than public housing. And that's what this project is going to be. Let me see if I have anything else before we necessarily open it for questions.
I do want to say, while Jonathan's looking at his notes, that just like the Century Terrace and Harborview project, these properties will continue under the ownership of the Housing Commission, which has, been the commitment that the commissioners have put in place as we entered the program. We wanted to maintain long-term ownership and local oversight and guidance on these programs and day-to-day operations, so that 40 years from now, they're still here. And that program that we're entering into has 20 years that you have to agree to subscribe through RAD and continue on. But the long-range goal is that these properties will be maintained in a very good manner so that well after we're all gone, they'll be here to serve the community.
And management is, it's going to be primarily with the Housing Commission or the Riverside Housing, which is the new kind of nonprofit entity out of the Housing Commission. But we do have a joint venture agreement with Commonwealth Management Corporation, and we manage over 6,000 units across the country. And we're providing kind of our expertise to ensure that the properties are obviously looking very nice in the long term.
So the income level is capped at $41,280. Do they take into account a person's assets? Does that count against them if they wanted to live here for some reason?
In that is, so the 41,280 is for a two-person household, so
Right.
bigger households will be more. It's essentially asset income. Clint and Lindsay, you know a little bit more about how that's judged.
For the subsidized units, the units that residents that were public housing and are now under what's called project-based rental assistance, their costs are capped at 30%, just like they are right now. So they will see hardly any increase in rental costs for themselves. The rest is supplied through the vouchers received from HUD. The cap is a percentage, and we just didn't want to give you guys, percentage. We wanted to give it a real number. So you can take the area median income that's established by HUD and figure it out for 80% of that by the family. So it's capped at that 80% for the LIHTC, also. But that's a pretty broad range at the height of it for different size families that are able to move into it.
But I think what Linda was trying to get at, this is income-based. So if you have an annuity or if you own property, that's not calculated to or against being eligible for this housing, correct?
No, yeah, it's based on the income. So if you have an annuity, how much income do you get off that annuity per year? That's the calculation, or a savings account, or those. And then one time, what?
Or a IRA?
The income.
Same thing. It's the income that you receive in the certification period, not asset.
Okay.
Yeah.
Clint, I have one question, just for curious. What involvement will HUD have once all these units are converted?
They, there are two halves of the house. They will oversee the project-based rental assistance, but it's a lot looser than under public housing. So we, basically, if we do the rent calculations according to the voucher system, there's no oversight. There's requirement of inspections that have to be done. There are different kind of inspections than we have now. They're the same kind of as a private landlord would get. It has a Section 8 voucher, resident living there. Paperwork and such is different and reduced, and it's more, the best way to put it, it's more management friendly to allow more time focused on the properties and less time focused on the paperwork that has to be done.
Thank you.
On the existing scattered sites, you talked about them being sold. Is there any money set aside for demolition if they can't be sold in a reasonable amount of time, or if they're not basically in a condition to be able to be restored to living standards?
Right now, we don't really foresee a problem selling. We have interested parties already Habitat for Humanity has a significant interest in some of the area. And we want to talk to the land bank, of course. But selling of the property, the buyer would have 30 days to demolish. There's only 2 buildings that are worth keeping, and those are the 2 new ones that were built on Vine Street here in Ara. So they're in good shape, just need some updating, and such. So, but whoever buys it will be required to demolish and remove and clean and cover.
So that's not, in no way, there's no dollar set aside from the Housing Commission for demolition?
We will have money if we need to.
If you do, okay,
To do the demo. We won't let them sit there vacant.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, and like Clint said, Housing North is another organization we want to work with about looking at the best uses to redevelop those and, continue to meet the housing need here.
So when do you intend on coming back to the city then with a request for the pilot? You have an October 1 deadline, correct?
Yes, yep.
So you'll need that first meeting in September then?
Yep.
Okay.
First meeting in September. I think, I think George is already working on the drafts.
So council, expect that on an upcoming agenda. You'll see a pilot agreement and a municipal services fee similar to what we did with Mr. Hollander and that we've done several other ones recently, and what we did with the Housing Commission for Century Terrace and Harborview.
Has there been anything worked with the Planning Commission or any public hearings on this?
The PUD application has gone into the Planning Commission, and we're targeting the September Planning Commission meeting for that.
With public hearings?
Yes, yep. So I believe the public hearings will be going out this Friday. I believe it is.
Are we going to be able to see any type of sketches of what these buildings are going to look like
Yeah, absolutely.
before we approve the pilot?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. We have, with the PUD application, there were renderings of the elevations that we can provide. And, yep.
And I saw that you have 10% are going to be handicap accessible. Are any of the others a possible retrofit? Because I know that in some of the developments where they were able to be reconfigured if the requirement exceeded the capacity.
Yep, so all of the first floor units, so 50% of the units will be visitable, which means that someone with a handicap or a wheelchair can visit those units. The second floor will be accessible by stairs, so those won't be visible, but the visitable units will be fully adaptable to barrier-free, so they can be, grab bars can be added, all of that.
Okay.
Light switches will be lower, everything. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Lake Wind's apartment homes, do you have any, how close do you have another development that's similar?
We can, we have a lot of pictures on our website we can provide.
Do you have any close to Manistee?
So we, as far as this style, nothing close to Manistee. We just completed a project in Grand Rapids near downtown. That's a 3-story elevator building. That's the Edge Flats on Seward.
Okay.
But we have many others. We have some in Indiana. Our company started in Wisconsin, and we still do a lot of development in Wisconsin, so there are a number of examples there.
Aaron, do you have any questions? Jim? Cindy? Dave?
All good.
Thank you.
Very interesting, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
No, it's not the same. It's the same one. It's the same thing. No.
How do I just do that?
We gotta get the roads fixed.
Next, we will have update on American Rescue Plan by the interim city manager, CFO Ed Bradford.
Yes, Council, I wanted to just kind of bring you up to date where we're at with the ARPA funding. There was a lot of hype and excitement about this when it was first announced and came out, and all kinds of information that a lot of it turned out to be not as accurate as maybe people were hoping for. But the process is starting to get a little bit more defined. The city looks like it's in line for about $640,000. Which will come in 2 different payments. We have not received the first payment yet. We have applied for it. There was an application process that the state required. It was pretty straightforward. So we did that, but we have not received that first payment. And once we get that payment, the second payment will be 1 year or 12 months after that. So it comes over a 2-year period. We're considered to be a non-entitlement community, which means basically we're a smaller unit of government. The larger units of government got their money directly from the feds. Our money is coming via the feds through the state. So the state's actually distributing it. What that also means is we'll have less onerous reporting requirements for the ARPA, although those are not defined yet. So that's one of the unknowns as to what those reporting requirements will be. It's important to note that there will be audits of some of the non-entitlement units of government, and there is the potential to have to pay back funds if they're not spent according to what the federal treasury guidelines are. I think that chances of that happening are unlikely because there's a lot of projects that clearly do qualify for funding under this, but I think some communities that may want to push that envelope might find that comes back to bite them potentially. One of the things that we're still sifting through because they don't have the best guidance yet are the eligible uses. And on the screen in front of you in the memo I provided are the 4 categories. So the first is, and these are broad categories: response to public health emergency or its negative economic impact, providing premium pay for essential workers within caps, provide government services to the extent of revenue lost, and to make necessary investments in water, sewer, broadband infrastructure. The Treasury has published a guidance document. They've updated it a few times with some frequently asked questions. We have gone through that just kind of briefly, and we're waiting to get firmed up more so we can schedule a future work session to kind of talk through what some of those things and ideas might be. We've solicited requests from the different department heads, and we'll continue to do that to refine that to see what might make sense from the department head standpoint. But we also want to make sure that the council and the community are included in the discussion. Although it's not a huge amount of money, it's still significant and could fund a lot of different things. I mean, for example, if funding for the detour route for the 31 bridge construction, which is Memorial Drive and Washington Street, somehow fell through from MDOT, a portion of these funds could clearly be used for the water portion that's underneath those streets. It can't be used directly for streets, but it can certainly be done for the water and sewer portions. So there's some of those conversations that need to be had. The one thing on all the different webinars that I've sat through and listened to that they stress over and over again, Michigan Municipal League also stresses this, is that there's no need to rush into making the decision on how to spend these funds. We have plenty of time to spend them. They give you a 3-year window, and the projects themselves then have an additional year or 2 years to be finished if something is done right at the end. And they suggest a kind of a deliberative process on determining where those want to be spent at. We did, in the budget, have a couple of placeholders for some of the funds that we still have to determine whether or not it's eligible underneath the guidelines, which would be an appropriation for Housing North and an additional appropriation for economic development. So those are things that we need to research to make sure that those are still things that we can fund. If we can't fund them, then we'll have to have a discussion about, possibly funding those out of general fund resources. That's where we're at today with the ARPA fund. So I don't know if council has any questions. Sure.
When we go, if you don't mind paging back up again, when we talk about emergencies, could that be a safety issue? I mean, if we have several safety issues. For example, the Riverwalk. We have that S curve that's in front of the public parking.
So, and this is where it gets a little bit dangerous, because these broad categories, people can read those and see, well, this seems to fit there. This is talking about the public health emergency related to COVID, not sidewalks, not
or negative
bad
economic
roads.
impact.
So the negative economic impact is probably the one that's going to have the most leeway. but there is some guidance regarding that, and a lot of what they're talking about is assistance potentially to impacted businesses. And those more social type impacts that frankly the city really isn't set up very well to handle. So again, there's a lot of interpretation within some of this, but there are guidelines, and so that's why we've got to sort through the guidance. They keep updating it, the frequently asked questions, and coming with clarifications. I'm going to have some conferences this fall that there'll be a ton more information that will give even further clarification. One of the conferences early on, or the information that was out, said 100% of all public safety expenditures are going to be deemed to be COVID related, and you can reimburse yourself for that. Well, that would have been ideal, because we could reimburse all those public safety expenditures that would be eligible, and then we could use that money however we wanted to, because the funds are fungible. But now they've kind of walked that back, so that may not be the case. So as I say, it's kind of an evolving and a moving target, but there are certainly things that could be done. If we had a $650,000 water project, we could do it without any problem whatsoever. But we've got to decide, how to prioritize it and what makes the most sense. So I guess the takeaway here is we don't have complete information. There's going to be more information coming out, and there'll be a process put in place under myself and the new city manager to make sure that we have adequate input and can, come to the consensus on how those funds want to be spent.
This is different from what the Congress is dealing with today, with the $1 trillion.
Yes, and I don't have any information on that, except there's going to be a lot of money flowing to roads, potentially, so.
Can I ask a question? Do you have a process for how you're going to determine where, like you said, that they'll get input? Do you have a process?
Well,
for that,
I think
or is there-
that's gonna evolve. Clearly, the management team will have some suggestions based on the guidance to help council make those determinations, but ultimately it's council's decision as to how those funds are spent. So I think that's the rough outline of how that process will look. I mean, council may want to have a public hearing, but to get public input, although the public isn't going to have as good information as council has or the staff has. So, but certainly, it'll all be done in a public meeting, so they'll be able to have input and comment on that. And I think there'll be some guidance probably coming out as to maybe some best practices to receive that public input as well. But keep in mind, we're getting $630,000, which is significant. The Manistee County is getting $4.8 million. So they're getting twice as much per capita on a 25,000 person population base. So that's, when you get up to those levels, that's really significant to be able to do things. So that could go towards, broadband infrastructure potentially. And I know there's been some discussion about that and some other things as well. But the county is also really kind of slow playing this until they can get better guidance and figuring out, what they want to do and how it can be spent legally and those sort of things.
And has this always been the number? This seems like way low than we talked about a few months.
Originally, the number way back was 1.1 million. So that's the biggest it's ever been for the city, but this is what it turned out to be when they all said and done.
I heard 20 million for the county.
Yeah, I've never heard a number that big, so. But it's interesting that the counties get twice as much per capita as the cities do.
This is pretty small from what I thought we were going to be talking about.
Yep.
I've got a question. So with sewer and water,
This is what we got.
we've got 3 years worth of plans.
You see that Genesee County?
Do we know how much we have already put into plans that we could then use against this dollar amount?
I can get you that number, and Mr. McCool might have a better idea, but
At some future meeting?
I think we could spend that easily over the next 3 years on those projects. Jeff?
The capital improvement plan could spend every dime of it.
Well, no, I understand, but if we basically said, okay, we've got, in our budget process, we already expect to spend 600,000, then that 600,000 we could safely spend from this dollar amount, and then have 600,000 that we could use out of the general fund to fund other activities. Am I not correct?
You're not, because the water and sewer fund comes out of an enterprise fund. So if you had $600,000 worth of water expenses to various projects, whether it's,
It comes out of the water.
and that
okay,
can't be
it comes
used
out
for
of that
general fund items. That's why if we could use it towards public safety reimbursement of salaries and payroll, like they were talking about early on, that would be ideal. And so we are going to explore that, because that gives us, I believe, the most flexibility. However, like I said, they've kind of walked that back a little bit since they first came out with that. So it's very complex, but we'll get the best information possible and have a robust discussion about where it needs to go and what's the highest priority and what it can be legally spent on.
And then do we have any idea of what our estimated revenue loss has been from other taxes and things over the pandemic?
So I have not calculated that, but there are some tools out there, and we actually probably, if the way I look at it from a budgeting standpoint, we probably didn't lose any revenue, but the way they're telling you to calculate it, there's the potential that we do have lost revenue. So I think once we calculate those, that'll be the low-hanging fruit, and that certainly should be the first tranche of where this money goes, because then it truly does become fungible and you can spend it on whatever you want. So if we had a $100,000 lost in the general fund, you get reimbursed for that. Now that can go to whatever we could legally spend stuff on the general fund. So I have to do those calculations, and again, they're still refining those as to how they're defining them. But they said they thought even if you didn't think you had a revenue loss, you're probably going to end up showing a revenue loss because they build some inflationary factors into the numbers and things that maybe we necessarily didn't experience.
Didn't we have a heavily rolled back, though? How would that affect?
I
actually our
don't know
revenue?
that that's going to impact the period that they're looking at. That's more forward-looking, and they're looking back a ways. So they have very tangible measurements as to what periods you have to look at.
And does the county have the same 4 points of rule sets for spending?
I believe they do, yep.
Well, it's exciting to have a gift.
It's definitely going to help, I think, fund some initiatives which will be very beneficial to the community.
Anybody else have any questions?
So you're saying that we have pretty much 2 years to make a decision on how we're going to spend it? Is that what I'm reading?
The way the language is, and again, there's some uncertainty, that basically they're saying you have 3 years to spend it. However, if you're like in the middle of a project that started before that 3 years, then you have a little bit more time to do it. So, and we haven't even gotten the first tranche of money yet, so I think the clock starts ticking once you actually receive it.
And you
So-
said you've applied for it already.
We have
right?
applied
Okay.
for it. I think it should have been here by now, but the state probably applied for an extension of some sort with the federal government, because I haven't gotten any notification as to when you were even going to get it, but I'm expecting, within the next month to 6 weeks, probably.
We may be starting our budget for the following year earlier with this coming up.
Well, this certainly will be a part of the next budget conversation, I think.
That's what I was thinking.
Right. If there's no further questions, shall we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is talking about the Riverwalk? I have prepared some comments that I'd like to share with council and with the audience. I just want to talk about the comments and the types of things that I've been hearing over the last few months about the Riverwalk. I want to stress most of the people that are making these comments are not visitors that I've run into. It's basically our residents. They're certainly the most vocal group, and they've been vocal for the last few years. I know that under Kelly Greavy's leadership, the volunteers have been very diligent about weeding and scrubbing the boards and cleaning railings and the trash receptacles, benches, power washing sidewalls, and cement walkways all summer. Obviously, due to the pandemic, nothing much was done last year. The year before that, I remember taking 40 pictures of the Riverwalk because I was concerned about the condition of the decay and lack of attention as far as cleaning up the garden areas. And I've kind of made it a habit of every budget session to ask if we can at least get it cleaned up by Memorial Day, 4th of July, and Labor Day. I'm not trying to offend anybody here, but I feel like my request has been largely ignored by city administration and the DPW director. I don't feel that the benches are being refurbished during the winter months, and I think, Jeff, you've admitted that not much is much has been able to happen with that, at least for the last 3 years. Weeding is probably not a chore that the DPW has enough time for. The mere weed whacking with a trimmer is different from getting down on your hands and knees and pulling weeds. It's time-consuming, labor-intensive, and people that are doing it now are the volunteers. Why? They're simply sick and tired of the same old excuses every year, and they want their city to look inviting and welcoming. They are not doing it because the DPW is too busy and they feel sorry for the department. They are not doing it because there isn't enough money. They are just tired of looking at a depressing, neglected area. That's the motivation. I know this year with the West End being rebuilt, there's really no need to worry about doing any maintenance there until it's finished. And I appreciate the fact that the DPW has supplied Kelly with lawn bags, the use of the one and only power washer that the garage has, hoses, edging, and mulch. And Kelly has done a very good job of being a good steward of the power washer. She has to pick it up and she has to return it daily. The DDA and the chamber has paid for some stain to do the benches, and that's been done by volunteers. But to be honest with you, I don't see this as a huge collaboration. The real cost is in the labor, and so far it's been free and it's been on the backs of the volunteers. Taxpayers want to know if the volunteers are doing all this maintenance. If the volunteers are doing all this maintenance, where's the money saved being spent? And that seems to me like a very legitimate question. More importantly to me, where was all the labor it takes to weed, clean, power wash in this year's budget? Basically, we are relying on part-time help in the summer. I don't know what the number is. I thought it was 10, it could be less. I don't feel there was ever a plan to handle the obvious cleaning and maintenance the volunteers are doing on the Riverwalk. I do feel that after spending 8 years with the city, that there should be a way to budget and allocate labor costs. I am also concerned about Veterans Park. It's badly overgrown and it's a safety hazard in many spots. I did talk to Mr. Hollander and he said the matching grant money did not come through, so he donated his $30,000 to the college. That was a disappointment because the Veterans Park is really in bad shape. Yet it doesn't appear that much is going on over there except for grass cutting. And I'm very concerned about safety issues, and we need to ensure that all safety issues are being addressed. On the Riverwalk downtown, I've already talked about the S-ramp in front of the small public parking area is crumbling and has shifted. It has Japanese knotweed towering over it, and the walkway is uneven. It's a safety hazard to anyone who uses it. I just feel that safety hazards need to be addressed and funded. They just can't be put off. This seems to be common sense, and yet I see no action being taken. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe you've got a plan, but I haven't heard it. Many people are complaining to me now. Comments regarding the DPW director are unflattering, and it's tough to hear. The Riverwalk has become the catalyst of discontent. Thankfully, it no longer looks dirty thanks to the volunteer efforts, but I have a bad feeling we're never going to see that effort again because they expect the tax dollars to pay for it. So let me know what you think about this, because I'm ready for an open and honest, thoughtful discussion on how this budgeting process works to clean up the Riverwalk.
Okay, thank you for those comments. I did ask DPW Director McCool to be in attendance tonight and be prepared to talk about it. And he and I have had a number of discussions about the Riverwalk. And actually tomorrow at the DDA meeting, Director McCool and lead man Brandon Prince are going to be there. And this is one of the agenda items, not just the Riverwalk, but the agreement with the DDA. So I do want to have Jeff give a short history for the benefit of the council members that may not have been here as to where we've been with the Riverwalk in terms of how it's been maintained in the past and what the different mechanisms have been. And I also want him and I to address the shifting expectations of the community, which need to be reacted to, but sometimes may not be realistic in a short term, possibly intermediate term. And I'd also like to discuss a little bit about the reality of what needs to be done there down on the Riverwalk, which Jeff will address in the history, but what some of the limitations are in terms of DEQ requirements on actually cleaning the Riverwalk with power washers, which have changed. So there's a number of factual things I think we need to talk through, which might help to clarify some of the reasons that the community might be having some discontent with the appearance of the Riverwalk.
I do think the first thing that we should talk about, though, is the budget and how much in the budget is set aside for maintenance on the Riverwalk specifically.
We
Because
don't-
people are concerned about their tax dollars. I understand that a lot of it's going to the DDA and that area, and they have an agreement with the city. But still, the weeding and the cleanliness is just the most labor-intensive part of taking care of that. And I would like to know where we have those numbers in our budget.
So we don't have specific numbers to weed the Riverwalk in the budget because we don't budget at that level of detail. But we do have seasonal help, and we actually added some seasonal help recently to help do that. So Jeff, would you like to come up and kind of talk through what we were discussing earlier?
Yeah, I don't have the exact dates, but at some point, the DDA, Citizens Council, whoever it was concerned about the maintenance of that Riverwalk, and we're talking 15 years or more ago. And at the time, the DPW's response was to put 2 summer help and not even have them report to the garage. They reported at the Marina building, and this is back before that Marina building was rebuilt. And they punched in there, all their tools were there, and they spent 40 hours a week along that Riverwalk doing the various maintenance tasks. At some point, people weren't satisfied with the work that was being done, so the DDA decided that they would contract out those services, and they hired a landscaping firm and put together a list of requirements and duties that were expected. And I want to say that came in around $16,000 the first year. And this is anecdotal because I wasn't part of this part of it. But I do know that when I was hired, there were concerns being expressed. This is back when Patrick Kay was the director of the DDA. There were concerns being expressed. He and I had many conversations because the public doesn't separate, is a landscaper doing this or is the city doing this? Everybody believes it's our responsibility. Everybody then complains to us. So we had many conversations on that. As they went back to their contracted company and started being more stringent, those costs kept escalating year after year. And I believe at some point, the number got to over $24,000 for that annual maintenance contract. At that point, the DDA came back to the city and said, the prices are just getting out of control. Can you help us out with that? So I went back to my parks lead man. We had a discussion on it, and I said, what would it take for us to commit to this? And we decided that it would take that with 2 additional summer help. And you have to understand that the 2 summer help aren't dedicated 40 hours a week to that Riverwalk. Just like you mentioned, the biggest cleanup, the biggest push is before Memorial Day. So there's a lot of all hands on deck with all the summer kids, with the 2 parks employees to get all the parks open, get them ready. And that first benchmark is Memorial Day. And the second benchmark is obviously 4th of July, making sure we're ready for that. Then we start doing some of the internal projects, and then obviously trying to make sure everything is back up to snuff for Labor Day. So the decision was that with 2 additional summer people and the expenses for materials, the mulch, the annual mulch that we put down, 90% of that is within the DDA district. There's a little bit at the islands on First Street and on Cherry Street, but the majority of it comes from there, is $300 to $3,500 a year. So I think that original payment, do you remember, I thought it was around $18,000.
I think that's right.
Is what it was settled on, where the DDA paid the city $18,000. They then eliminated the contract with their landscaping company, and the city took that over. And that's probably been 5 years, maybe 6 years. In the current agreement between the city and the DDA, there's a lump sum. And so this portion of it this is just a portion of that lump sum. All of that money doesn't go to that effort. There's
I understand.
various different things.
Yeah.
So as another example, I think they were paying close to $9,000 a year just to water the hanging flower baskets downtown, just to water them. And so we said, you know what, Blossom Boulevard is starting back up. They're gonna need help watering. We'd be willing to set up one of our trucks to be able to water both of them, and we'll take that on. So that was, when we did that agreement, it was all kind of looped together. So there's not a specific line item or a dollar amount that we put towards the Riverwalk. The guidelines are pretty much the ones that we use, and the ones that I've given to Mickey and making sure that our Parks lead man uses are the same guidelines that they had in their landscaping contract. The weeds, what we have done, or what Mickey's team has done, is they have put together a tank system, and so they have been, for several years, have been spraying them as opposed to actually pulling them. But I can tell you that just hasn't been very effective. So we had to take a different approach to that, especially in all the parking lots and so forth. The other thing that has been done at least once, twice a year, is the DDA Design Committee would walk with Mickey, and sometimes I would join that, and they would walk through the Riverwalk that's within the downtown, and then also walk some of the parking lots and along River Street. And when we first took over that contract, it was very clear that there was a lot of years of neglect. There were a lot of big things that they wanted to change. A lot of the bushes and the landscaping along the Riverwalk specifically, and actually in the parking lots, were 20 to 30 years old. They were overgrown. So they started to prioritize, and along the Riverwalk, a lot of the areas we cut, we trimmed, and Mickey would put a team of, 6 people down there and specifically address those. And so that list from the DDA has changed year to year, and this year we walked it this spring and compiled the list. I know you guys got copies of it. I just put it up on the screen, but these are all the items that they mentioned as we were walking along and discussing. What's in the red is what's been completed or in process. What's in blue hasn't been completed yet.
And I just want to clarify a little bit. This was the DDA who has been all over Jeff to make the downtown look good. Their list of things that they thought needed to be done. And as Jeff, I think, indicated, there's probably 80 to 90% of that has been done. So if the expectations as to how the community wants the Riverwalk to look are changing, then there needs to be a discussion with the DDA and the City Council and the Public Works and Administration as to how do we get to there and what resources is it going to take and who's going to be responsible for doing that. And as Jeff mentioned, we've tried it several different ways. We've had dedicated city staff on the Riverwalk. We've had contractors on the Riverwalk. We've had back to the DPW doing it with a little different approach. But it appears that some of the expectations in the community are changing on how that needs to be handled. So that's something that has to be discussed and a consensus come up, because the DDA is footing part of that bill. And if council wants to make that a priority in future budgeting, then they're going to have to reallocate resources from other places in the budget to make that happen. But I think, as Jeff said, a lot of what the DPW does down on the Riverwalk is they fix broken boards, and they fix light pedestals when they get knocked down, or they repair concrete or things like that. But the day-to-day weeding and things that are real hands-on and intensive probably isn't in their wheelhouse to be able to do without more resources being allocated. And frankly, it's not in the agreement with the DDA as to that level of granularity that they wanted. That agreement was specifically meant to be high level, so that, because what was happening before with the old agreements was there'd be here's the list of things we want you to do, DPW would be doing it, and the DDA would come back and say, oh, we forgot about these 3 things that we wanted to do, so can you just do that? And it was a constant back and forth. So this last agreement, which had been negotiated over the course of well over a year to try to address all of these issues in the past, was written in a way that allowed flexibility and allowed some measurements during the course of the year with the DDA and a mechanism to voice concerns. And that's part of the reason we're at the meeting, the DDA meeting tomorrow. We're going to talk about that because I think there's some lack of institutional knowledge on the DDA board. There's been a lot of new members on that as to the genesis of that agreement, which is only a year old now or 18 months old. So there needs to be some, more conversation around that. But in terms of getting the details of the Riverwalk done, there's going to have to be budgetary resources put towards that to make it happen. And if the DDA wants to go back and contract that out with a contractor, then we can adjust our budget accordingly and they can go ahead and pay for that. But at the time, it was getting too expensive for them. So I think it's a broader conversation than maybe we're having, and the DDA definitely needs to be a part of that because they're part of that funding source. I will say that there's north of $20,000 that's in the city's general fund as a restricted fund, which is the Riverwalk Maintenance Fund. And that was given to the city years and years ago. At one point, it was $100,000, and it was given with the stipulation that it was for major repairs and maintenance. Over the years, that's been used to repaint handrails. I believe it's been used to replace boards. It's probably been used to, at one point before the DEQ started clamping down on it, to power wash the Riverwalk, although whether that's a major maintenance item or not, I think is open to debate. But there is that money that's set aside there for if something really bad happens, that money can be tapped, and that's why we have it restricted. But Jeff, I do want you to talk a little bit about the power washing of the Riverwalk and why the wood sections haven't been done and the reasons for that, and also the guidance that I just provided you from Eagle on power washing.
Well, the city used to power wash all the wood structures in the city, and that stopped. It stopped specifically when we had the issues with Lighthouse Playground. Mm-hmm. There were a number of those wooden playground structures across the state of Michigan that different communities and probably environmental people pointed out that the way that those structures were treated to preserve them leached arsenic into the soils. There were, I think at the time, there were 8 or 9 different communities across Michigan that all had the playground structures that were built by the same company we had. So we shut ours down. We did an extensive research with some environmental consultants. And what we determined is that there's not a lot of guidance from EPA. There's not a lot of guidance from, at the time, DEQ. But what their guidance was basically don't eat off of it, don't touch it, and then touch your hands to your mouth. Well, that's a little different on your deck at home versus a playground. But what they do regulate is once that arsenic gets in the soil, then the soil levels can be tested. Then you can have that is a regulated contamination level. And then the concern obviously is then it leaches into the water. What the city did, if you remember, was to remove all the wood chips in there, stained it, and then put down a physical barrier because our soil below that playground exceeds the state limits. But we put a physical barrier down so that kids can't dig through it and can't get into that soil. Put a new liner down and then new wood chips. But since that time, we have stopped power washing wood. When we heard concerns about wood being slippery, obviously wood is, no matter where you're at, wood is slippery when it gets wet. But what we were hearing is on the west end, down by, say, from Cedar Street to Tamarack Street, in that zone, that there was a lot of moss and fungus growing on it. So what we did was we washed that as the best we could, and we actually went along the city property on the riverbank and we contracted to have trees trimmed. And our solution to that was get more sunlight to it so that it dries up faster, and I really haven't heard many concerns about that since. Ed reached out to our brownfield consultant and asked, is there a way that you can do power washing and do it safely. Is that fair? And basically, what it came down to, if I recall, was you can power wash and do it safely, but you have to capture all the water and then you have to dispose of it at the treatment plant, and the treatment plant has to be able to take that. Now, I don't think that would apply to concrete, but certainly it would apply to treated lumber from before
I have a
where
question.
the date is.
I believe we have irrigation systems down on the Riverwalk.
None that operate.
Oh, what happened to that?
I'm told that they were damaged many, many years ago,
What were they?
and they've never been
I
able to
couldn't hear
find
you.
those.
What were they?
We have an irrigation system down the Riverwalk that is not working.
Sometimes I don't hear you. Mike, I heard it now, but yeah, I hear you.
Okay,
When you were talking earlier, I missed some of the stuff because of the microphone.
sorry about that.
Thank you. That's okay. It's my ears now. You're talking.
Okay. It was better when I was sitting next to you, right?
So there are a number of gardens that are along the Riverwalk that, there were a couple years where the DDA, they have a program where they have different groups volunteer. They plant, maintain, and there was some gap in that. So there was a couple years where nothing was done in those flower beds. I think there's 6 or 7 of them. The last 2 or 3 years, those have been very active and planted and maintained. And we have actually made sure that there are water sources, I think it's within 50 or 100 feet of each of those locations. You can tell where those are at because they've got the signs and the placards that are out.
Right. I'm still baffled, and help me out here, because this is just really bothering me. If there was no DDA, the city would still be getting the revenue that is diverted to the DDA district. Why aren't we taking care of it? We should have some, I'm sorry, just because, you know, I feel like we're kicking the can down the road to say that the DDA is involved in it, and I see that as part of it. But honestly, we need to really think about what our city looks like. We're using it in marketing all over the place, to come walk on our beautiful Riverwalk, walk along the river, look at the freighters, do this. The only year that it's looked good recently is this year on the parts that the volunteers have been working on. It should be taken care of, whether it's partially funded by the DDA money or not. And I'm just getting too many complaints about it. And I think, I live here too. I looked at it this spring and was completely horrified at the conditions some of those beds were in, and they're terrible to try to work in. We've got sinkholes in some of them that are pretty dangerous. So we need to not just look at this is what we think we're responsible for doing, but how does this look to the rest of the world, and how does it look to our residents who want to enjoy this? I sense there's a real disconnect, and we really need to get back to taking care of things like that. The Veterans Park area is absolutely scary. I walked down there. I mean, you'd go around a curve on the walk just getting down there. You don't even have visibility. You don't know who's coming the other way. And, you know, unfortunately, it brings to mind who's down there. You don't know who's down there if you don't have good visibility. That should really be addressed. Couldn't the DPW at least be working on that?
We have the
Trimmed
last 3 years we've been working on actually pulling some of the shrubs. That park is 50, 60 years old. So, and I'll tell you, the vandals are throwing the bricks from the walls, the blocks of concrete, the bricks from the walkways. They're throwing them in the river faster than we can replace them. The vegetation, we've actually been cutting and removing sections of those just to make it more visible, so less of that vagrancy is happening. It's a real problem down there, and that's why we prioritize that for a full renovation, and which will be all brand new walkways, new walls, new steps down to the band shell, when I say landscaping, I mean shrubbery and so forth. And then we also intend to put lighting in that park so that it is safer at night.
Well, I know there's a $34 million capital improvement fund. If you add up everything, we've got about $34 million that we're hoping to eventually get bonds for or grants for or have cash for. But when you have a safety issue, it should be addressed. You can't just wait for it to come up in funding for capital expenses. That could be 2 or 3 years down the road, and it just gets worse and worse. That's the part of that's the part of the budgeting that I'm a little bit upset about, because it's the part that we're responsible for the safety, health, and welfare of every citizen that's here.
So, Mayor, I did have a conversation with Jeff about the S ramp, and I haven't looked at it in a while. I realized that it was, but that's not, it's more of an aesthetic issue, is it not? It needs to be replaced. What was, so what was the one that we talked about where it was aesthetic, but it wasn't a safety issue? Different area, apparently.
Must be.
Yeah. So I think if there's truly a safety issue,
We'll look at it.
well, I will go look at it, but if there's truly a safety issue, then that should be addressed, and if we have to do a budget amendment or pull it out of fund balance, we can, if it makes sense to do that. I absolutely agree with that. But I think that there's areas that it's aesthetic. Do we want them to look nice? Absolutely. But are they truly a safety issue? Probably not. So again, I think through the budgeting process, through the discussion with the DDA, we need to align what the expectations are, and if they're at a higher level of where they are today, then we need to figure out through the budgeting process how to get there and address that so that everybody can agree, okay, this is what we want it to look like, this is what we're willing to spend and reprioritize resources to do, and we're going to make that happen in the next budget. And certainly that will be a conversation about the next budget process. As you recall, Council has used a lot of the resources that were available to go towards streets, particularly local streets, over the past 5 to 7 years. So we've shifted priorities to do that. If now we have priorities that are shifting back to maybe the Riverwalk, and we do have a little bit more funding for roads through the new gas taxes and such that we're thinking, maybe that's a time to consider reprioritizing that. But to Mayor Pro Tem Szymanski's comments at a meeting a few days ago, the pie isn't growing. We had a Headley rollback this year, and other costs are increasing. So certainly we can address priorities, but we have to shift it around and understand what those priorities are and be able to plan for that. And we can do that, but we have to make sure that we have a consensus as to what those priorities are and how they're going to be funded.
Well, maybe we should go back and revisit the oil and gas fund. I mean, we're only taking 3.75% instead of 4%. Look at this. Can we ask if, I mean, I look at my own funds in my personal position. I certainly don't have $10 million tucked away in an oil and gas fund, but I can tell you that it's been a good year for most people, even people that are retirees who are on a very conservative path with their investments. So I don't understand we can't at least get, I think that was $21,000 or something that we decided we didn't need. We certainly need it. Well, we can certainly find a home for it. And I think we should look at
Any money is welcome. I respectfully disagree with wanting to go back and revisit the oil and gas fund, but that's certainly council's prerogative. But if you look at the history of the oil and gas fund, it really wasn't designed to fund things like weeding. It was designed to fund things that were like capital improvements. So
to a different topic. We need to get after the safety issues. I do think that one ramp is a safety issue.
absolutely, and I will have the Public Works Director and the engineer look at that and come up with a plan to get that corrected.
Yeah, that's
If that's
in
the number
process
one
right
priority issue, so.
Well, 2 years ago, I asked about that walkway down from the parking lot down to the band shell. And Jeff said you were gonna work with other groups, and have we had any groups come forward so we can get this, because somebody's gonna fall out.
Yeah, there were 2 different groups that had pledged some assistance, and neither one of those materialized. One of them actually adopted the park but never performed any work. But that's why we did make that grant application. And the city does have the money set aside. So if we're successful in our application this spring, then that whole park will be renovated.
And if it turns out that there's enough flexibility within the ARPA funds, because could be tied to tourism and bringing more people on and helping to recover, then you might be able to do matching grant dollars with that. So there's possibilities there to be able to do stuff, but we just have to make sure that guidance is proper. or with the different projects that are in this capital improvement bond, and there's a number of them, and each of these projects has their own budget, some come in under, some come in over. If there's extra funds available, we might be able to put more towards that. But the idea was, and the discussion was, we want to do this all at once and get that done. And if at the end of the day we can't get a grant match or we can't use ARPA funds and there aren't resources, we might be able to do some of it with some of the money that we had slotted. We just didn't get the trust fund grant. And we did talk about trying to reapply and maybe increase the score with the next go-around, but that's pushing towards the limit of when we have to expend those funds. I think we'd be okay doing it, but I think we are planning on reapplying for
And
the
we
trust fund
also,
grant.
we also said, if we don't get the DNR grant fund to do the whole project, then we're gonna reprioritize and do just what you're saying. Take the money that we have set aside for match, and we're not gonna be able to renovate the whole park, but we need to address, the steps going down to the band shell are just, they're horrible. They're
Do
horrible.
we have any plans to get this started at all? I mean, do you have a plan drawn up?
We have, well, we don't have detailed plans, but we do have.
Conceptual plans.
We do have a concept plan, enough to cost estimate it out and fulfill the requirements of the grant application. Yeah,
That plan?
Jeff, are we still a clean marina, certified clean marina?
yes.
So I see it, the extinguisher boxes were pulled, is that in the marina?
No, that was along the Riverwalk.
Okay.
Within the DDA.
Thank you.
They were empty.
Well, I just knew they were part of the clean marina project in the marina, so I'm just curious if there was a tie there.
I can honestly tell you that it's not a day goes by when one or two people are not asking me about the condition of the Riverwalk or Veterans Memorial Park. And they're fearful about walking down to Veterans Memorial Park to the water's edge because of the overgrowth and everything else, and you've got loose boards, you've got boards that are deteriorating. Now, you don't have to fix the whole thing, but at least make it safe. I don't understand why that can't be done. It should be a concern for everybody at the city level.
If it's not being done, I will look into it and make sure they're doing that.
Okay. And Ed, I'm gonna hold you to walking down to that ramp.
I absolutely will with Mr. Kumukula tomorrow. One thing I will mention on the West Riverwalk project, we did or will be executing a change order on that to do a pilot section, and where we're going to actually not have wooden decking, but have composite decking.
That would be better.
Yeah, it's more expensive, but it'll be a good test to see how that holds up and whether it grows mildew and how slippery it gets. So that's something that as we start to have to replace boards, if we're unable to wash them, that we might start migrating to again to try to keep a little bit lower maintenance.
We should maybe look at re-landscaping some of those garden areas too into something that's more sustainable.
Yeah, and I think that's been one of the issues is, as an example, the handrails, do you paint them black, do you paint them white, do you put stainless steel, they get hot, but there's some materials that are just lower maintenance than others. Some of the wooden areas, they had done, you have concrete, you have wood, you have concrete, it kind of gives it a nice pattern, but some of those areas that are wood, you could replace with colored concrete, and then you wouldn't have as many maintenance issues. So those are conversations that have to happen as you start to renovate those areas. The other thing to keep in mind, just for kind of future, when the Gateway project actually starts to get a little bit closer, and they do have a brownfield plan, public infrastructure certainly is going to be a part of that plan. And I would think that we've had preliminary discussions and would probably think that would have council support to renovate all of the Riverwalk in that section where the Gateway project is going in, and potentially could be even a little bit further down using some of the brownfield funds for that. So those are all things that are out there that'll help to get where the community wants this Riverwalk to be. And that's probably one of the worst sections in terms of accessibility and just general utility down there. So I think that's a good way to help address that portion of it anyway.
That would be helpful.
Also understand that within the DDA district, the Riverwalk is on private property. So the easement that the city has basically extends from the physical improvement of the Riverwalk to the water. And a lot of the comments that I get are the upland private property stuff. And I know that a lot of the work that Manistee Proud has been doing the last couple of weeks has actually been improving on private stuff. And so I don't want, and people are getting confused by that on what's ours and what's theirs. So there's been a lot of private stuff done too.
Well, if anybody's been communication with the owners around, on the Riverwalk. I'm pretty sure Kelly's been in pretty tight communication with them. So I don't have
No,
any further
her and I have
comment.
communicated, as long as she's got the property owner's permission, that's fine. I'm just saying, not everything that's getting done is public property.
Well, let's concentrate on making sure the public property looks really good. And that's my point. It hasn't been taken care of, and it needs to be. So I think that's important to the residents. I get complaints about them, and we just need to really start focusing on making that a very lovely place to take a stroll. I think you would enjoy that yourself.
I do enjoy it.
Well, and this year, it's looking spectacular, thanks to Kelly. So, and the other volunteers, of course, you know, that are donating their time. But this can't go on. This is a lot of work. I'm not kidding. We all know who have volunteered that is a tremendous amount of work. But you got to budget for it. You got to plan for it. I think it's important enough to the city in its image to take care of it. I guess that's the end of my comments for this evening. Does anybody want to add anything?
Jeff, do we have a signed form that with landowners that about doing their property?
I'm not sure the question.
Where you said you were doing some of it is on private property. Do we
No.
have signed?
We
We don't
weren't.
do anything on the private property. Some of the volunteer work has improved the private properties.
Okay.
I'm sure it's with their consent.
We have the full right to maintain, repair, replace, improve anything that's within our easement area. I had George look at those leases because there were some questions about that. But we can't go on private property and do work on private property.
I was just wondering what it is.
All right.
Now, did they spray those weeds on River Street the other day? Remember the last meeting we had? They were coming in to spray them.
Yes, they did.
Okay.
Where did they spray?
I didn't look at I don't know if they sent exact locations, but the stuff that we laid out was pretty much from the 31 bridge down past that switchback. I think they went a little bit past that. And they said there's quite a bit on the private properties in there, and they had been weed whacked by the private property owners, so
That's
they were
not
gonna reach
helping.
out to them, because they said, this is the time of year where you can treat it with the chemicals they use. There's a different chemical form that they can use early in the spring when they first sprout, but that was, did you read that guidance? I was trying to remember. It is more dangerous to use it close to water sources. So that's why they plan this treatment in early to mid-August. But they said that, they told me they were gonna reach out to those private property owners, because after a week or two, when they'll grow another foot or two in a week, that they would come back and spray those if they got permission.
Now, is that harmful to people or pets?
Not once it dries, is what they've explained. So they did put signage up around where they treated, and then I think they waited a day or two and then removed those. But the next thing is that switchback is gonna look even worse, because all the green vegetation is now gonna be brown, and we can't remove that. It's gonna have to naturally deteriorate. They're probably gonna have to treat again next year, possibly the year after that. So
Well,
it's,
I'd
it's,
I don't know if we can get Spicer to look at that switchback, but
yeah, I said that's in process.
yeah.
And,
We need an expert to look at it because it's crumbling and it,
well, Mayor Pro Tem Szymanski showed me pictures where there was a small separation, and now it's up in the past, but several weeks.
Couple weeks, it's increasing. It's over, from the beginning of the spring until now, it's probably increased maybe 3-4 inches.
Yeah.
We're gonna look at it tomorrow, and we've been taking photos for several years as part of just inventory. So I looked at some of those old ones, I know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
it was, earlier this spring, it was literally just a gap, and now you can literally see
Yeah,
it.
it just looked like a board separation at first, but now the whole thing is tipping in the sidewalks.
And honestly, I think you're gonna find that it's undercut, because you can see a couple of places where it looks like the earth is literally been washed away from underneath it.
It could very well be another impact from the high water, and as that water recedes, the soils follow
We've
it.
talked about that so many times, I'm surprised you haven't walked down to see it, and You have or have not? I'm surprised you haven't walked down to look at it. Just as many times we brought that up here, I would hope that you would by next time we see you.
We're going to go look at it tomorrow. I was relying on Mr. McCool's assessment of it, so, been a little busy.
I do have a couple of comments.
Okay, just a minute. I think Cindy was trying to talk when you were,
Fine.
No worries. I just had a question, because I've heard both of you guys say this. You both said shifting expectations by the public. So I'm having a hard time understanding. I think all of us want the Riverwalk to look nice. Wouldn't that be or are there people who want it to look bad?
No, let me clarify that.
Okay, because, that's what I'm asking.
If you could have 3 different people look at a situation or look at a particular area, and to some of them it looks perfectly fine, some of them say, I could use some work, and some of them says, oh, it looks horrible. So what does a flower bed need to look like? What makes it excellent? What makes it looks good? You know, maybe some people want just mulch, maybe other people want flowers. My point is, you've got to have a common set of expectations as to what the performance goals need to be. Otherwise, you can't expect people to be held to something that's a moving target. So
Sure.
the guidelines that the DDA has set up, because they're the ones that are partnering on the maintenance of this, they walk through and said, this is what needs to be done. Jeff's done that. And they try to do what they can, but they don't have the resources, as Mr. McCool has said, to be down there on their hands and knees pulling weeds. If that's what the community expectation is, then those beds have to be redone, there has to be more money put towards it, there needs to be a private contractor or all of the above to make that happen. Once those expectations and goals are set, then it's easy to hold the people that are responsible for doing it accountable. But if those weren't the expectations at the beginning going into it, then that becomes a problem. And I'm not suggesting that we should accept the way the Riverwalk is. It's a beautiful natural setting. If there's aesthetic things and safety things and some other maintenance things that we need to put more resources, time, and attention for, we need to be able to plan for it, budget for it, and then execute on that. But if we change those standards in the middle, it becomes difficult to do. So it's pretty clear that council is moving in that direction. I think there'll be some conversation with that at the DDA, and then staff can put together a plan and through the next budgeting process to be able to execute at that higher expected level. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Oh, perfect, thank you. The last question, so not knowing necessarily the history on this, so the Riverwalk was its own entity for a while, and now it's underneath the DDA, or has it always
No.
been under the DDA?
So we'll take a little bit step back. The DDA, when you have a downtown development authority that can capture taxes and invest back in the infrastructure, it's a collaborative effort between the city and the DDA. The DDA will typically bond for those projects. They will put in infrastructure that the city might not normally have put in. And once that infrastructure is built, they turn it over to the city. The city owns all that infrastructure. The DDA doesn't own that. It's the city's responsibility to maintain it. But because they've now created infrastructure that wasn't there or maybe needs to be maintained at a higher level than it would have been, they realize that they have an obligation to help with that because they're capturing taxes that would otherwise go to the city's coffers to be able to maintain that. So that's why we partner with the DDA to maintain that thing, those assets, if that helps.
Thank you.
it's just tough for me to think that anybody would think that gardens that are chock full of weeds and there's slime on the boardwalk and things look dirty, that's acceptable. So I gotta believe the standard was set a little higher than that to begin with, because it's unacceptable the way it was in May when we first looked at it. So, I'm sorry, Nick, would you like to say something?
Well, respectfully, you're blaming the wrong people. It's this council who's responsible. I've been on this council for 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've never had a council member say, we need to fund all of these repairs and give them the money they need. Have you? No. What have we funded as a council is important. We make the decisions, we make the determinations, and we provide the guidance. So
Providing some tonight.
well, I get it, but you know, for 2.5 years, we've said nothing about the Riverwalk. The last 4 months, we've been beating up the city. I get it, there is plenty of blame to go around, but we gotta take the responsibility and the brunt of it. I've been on this council and had Mr. McCool 3 times bring projects forward for Veterans Park. Has anybody here taken the leap to say, okay, if you don't fund it, we're gonna take the money out of Hyde and we're gonna make that happen? That would have been our prerogative. We didn't do it.
But did anybody
We-
come and ask us to?
Well, we waited. We kept
Yeah.
waiting for, like I said, for somebody else to help us fund something. But it still comes back to our responsibility. I am as guilty, maybe more so than others, because I have seen it. I have walked the Riverwalk almost every day for the last 2.5 years, and I've seen the problems. And I do appreciate Ms. Kelly actually bringing it to my attention, saying, hey, my bad. But it's not just the DPW. They only have the resources that we give them, and we have not been generous with the resources. I can tell you, from my experience of running municipal operations, we don't have the manpower to be able to do what we should be doing. And that's part of what we have to be able to address and face with funding. And it's gonna take money. And what we don't have, and what we have not asked for yet, is a solid plan. The only plan that this council has ever asked the DPW for is how to fix the roads, in my time listening to the council. And they came up with a great plan. Now, it's years in the process and years to get it completed, but everything starts with a plan, Mr. McCullough. And from my position, we failed by not asking you to come up with a plan for the Riverwalk, to how to really sustain it to the level that it needs to be over the years. So we have a good understanding. Is it 50,000? Is it 100,000? Is it 200,000? Is it 5 people? You know what I mean? There are so many moving parts involved in this. You know, what kinds of surface options do we have from an engineering standpoint to take care of slippery areas? You know, can we put metal strips with, you know, with the, I don't know what you call them, but like you would put on stairs to stop them from being slippery? I know there's solutions. We've never asked for them. I consider that to be my bad. I should have, you know, again, I've been awakened to the point where I have failed in my responsibilities as a council member to be able to say, hey, this isn't going to fix itself. The 3 years of deterioration isn't going to fix itself unless we insist that it be done, because we've been waiting for somebody to use a magic wand and magically have funding come available for us, and it's probably not. So we're going to have to figure out how to make the money happen to make your job work. So I think a good plan is our first step. We need to know really what it really is going to take and what it's going to cost before we can go forward.
Well, I also disagree with you a little bit, because I have brought up the last 2 budget sessions, the condition of the Riverwalk. I've talked about it. I've asked if we could hit those holidays. It's been at budget time. We've all been quietly, maybe too quietly, asking for this. And now we're just getting a lot more pressure. Honestly, I think I really laid it out last week when I said that we need to be steering the car, which is basically what you're saying, and we need to do it. But I said it last week, so I don't disagree with you, but council should be setting the direction. I think the direction I'm hearing from the community is that we need to pay attention to safety issues, we need to pay attention to aesthetics, and I think there's a general rule that we could follow as what is acceptable that looks down there, rather than saying, well, the expectations are really high here, but I think there is a good average we could hit that's much better than just having weedy looking gardens and dirt and grit and slime on things. So it looks a lot better. Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate it. But we've got to figure out how to do it ourselves. So. Anybody else? If that's all, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.